Yes, believe it or not, this is Excel. I'm Matthew, your VB tutor, and today I'm going to show you how to go from this standard ugly spreadsheet to this application style menu system, allowing you to easily jump between sections of your workbook. With this amazing dynamic system, you can customize practically every aspect of this menu system seamlessly. By changing just a few values in a worksheet, you can easily add, remove, and change the entire menu structure, as well as change the look and feel of how it operates. Alright, let's dive in. Okay, the first thing we're going to want to do is head over to flaticon.com, and we're going to pick up a few icons from there. It's important when you download your icons, you download those as SVG files. That just makes things a bit easier when we're dealing with them in Excel. Once you've got those files, we're going to come into Excel and we're going to go to Insert, Pictures, Place Over Cells, and from this device, we're going to browse to our file and just going to input those there. Now these are going to be our icons that we use for our burger menu, for our sub-menu items, and so on. We're going to just bring these down to a reasonable size so we can start dealing with those a bit easier. Now what we name each of these icons is going to be very important. We're going to want to go into the selection pane to do this, or you can just change the name up here, but I like to do it in the selection pane, so we're going to go into the selection pane, and I'm going to name the burger item as open, and then this one here is close, and then this final one here as open submenu. Now these two are going to join into a single group. That group is just going to be called the burger menu, and we can just sort of leave those there for now. The next thing we're going to want to do is create a template for our buttons. These are going to be our menu buttons that come down as we select items from our menu. So I'm going to create these just as a standard rectangle and just size that however you like. These are going to be dynamically sized as the menu is created from the VBA code, so you don't need to necessarily have these at a perfect size right now. What I'm going to do is just put in a little bit of template text. So I'm just going to put in template text. This is going to just be our placeholder text. It doesn't matter what you put here, but it's just going to have a bit of information so that we can work with it. I'm going to pick a nice font. I'm going to use Sego UI, and I think the black font is going to be a nice option. We're also going to want to center that vertically and just bring it in from the side a little bit, and maybe we can just increase the text size for now. Next thing we want to do is just name that shape. So I'm just going to name this base because we're going to group this with the open sub menu item. Now because these are technically layers, we want to make sure that the open sub menu item is on top of the base, and we're just going to put that in here. Just resize that a little bit. Again, sizing right now doesn't necessarily matter. So we're going to group up these two items, and we're going to name this. This is going to be a very specific naming convention, so we need to follow this button template. There's going to be a button template for all of our subsequent menu items. Next, after this, we're going to want to create a couple of background shapes. These are going to be our base shapes for both of the menu and the sub menu. So I'm going to just create these again as a standard rectangle. If we create a rectangle there, just copy that. Now how you style this is going to be actually how it displays when you open up your menu. So you're going to want to make sure that this is no outline, and I'm going to use a nice grey colour as the background for those, and we're going to give it just a nice little shadow. This is just going to help accentuate the menu a little bit. Now for the naming of these, I'm going to call these menu underscore BG background and sub menu background. Now what we can do from here, we can sort of have a look and see how our menu is going to look. So we can grab our template button, make sure that's on top, and we can just sort of resize that. Now obviously our text is going to be a little bit big, so let's just bring that down. So I don't really like how that blue looks on the grey, so we're going to change that. What we can do is make this background of this base item here into a transparent layer. We don't want to just set the fill to no fill. If we do that, what ends up happening is you try and click on this area over here or this area here, anywhere sort of around this text, and it won't actually click on the button. So if we instead set that to a fill color, it doesn't matter what that fill color is. I'm just going to make that as orange, and if we right click on that, go to format shape, and we can just turn that transparency all the way up. This means that the shape is still clickable, but it doesn't actually have a color. Now the other thing we'll do is just get rid of that outline, and so that's going to be what our button looks like. I'm not very happy with how this indenting looks, so I'm going to come down here to decrease the indent, and then come over here to the size and properties, and we're just going to increase that left margin a little bit. This gives us just a little bit more control over how that indenting looks. Alright, now so this is going to be just generally how your button's going to look. We might want to just change the color of this as well. Say we have a white text, we want a white arrow to point to the sub menu, and don't worry about if you expect to have only a few items with some menus, or going to have a lot of items that don't have sub menus. This arrow, we're going to hide that in the code if there's not going to be a submenu, so you don't have to worry about the way that looks. Now I'm just going to set up a heading here as well. So I've got the cross and the burger. Just move those out of the way. I don't want these resizing when I'm stretching out columns or any rows or anything like that. So if we come here to the properties, we just go to don't move or size with cells. That means that if we resize the cells or the columns, the rows, that's not going to affect the size of those shapes. This first row, we're going to make this a nice big heading. So I'm just going to put that at about 60 pixels and I'm going to resize these. Alt Shift to make sure that they don't warp, and I'm going to put that in there, put them over the top of each other, because essentially what's going to happen is when we click one of them, it's going to hide the one we're clicking on and we're going to show the other button. Right, now so that's essentially all our setup's going to look like for the shapes. Now we're going to go in and create another sheet. This is going to be our menu setup sheet, so I'm just going to call that menu setup, and in here we're going to create a primary menu section, we're going to create a sub menu section, we're going to create a menu settings section, and finally a sub menu settings section. I'm just going to name what these columns are going to be. So we're going to have menu options. I'll explain what this show range means in just a moment, but we'll just get these column names set up. Okay, now they're all set up. So what does this show range mean? So what we're going to have when we create our menu, each of these items that we click on is essentially going to show a different range of columns. So that means if we have all this information in here, we hide these columns and then we show these columns over here. That's going to be what acts as our page system or our tab system. So that's essentially going to be the bread and butter of our entire application or our entire menu system. So we come back here into menu setup. Now I'm going to leave a gap here. What this enables us to do is once we have a bit of data in here, when we do a select current region in our code, if we set the first cell as B4 and we go current region, that will just select the data here. If we have information here and we set B4 as our first item and we do current region, that will select all of these headings as well. So if we just leave a blank row and we can actually just hide that row, then it looks and feels exactly like it should. But if we do a current region, that's going to select only the data, which is what we want. Now I'm going to set this up as a basic booking system. We're not going to do any of the code for actually creating a booking system. If you'd like to see a bit more information on how to set something like that up, you can head over to my video on how to set up a database system. In that, I create a simple booking system that interacts with an SQL database in the background. It's a really fantastic video if you want to check that out. Okay, so our menu options here, these are going to be our primary menu options. So we're going to have like a home button, we're going to have a bookings, customers, vehicles, and maybe a settings menu as well. So our home item, this is going to be like our dashboard. We don't necessarily need to have a sub menu for this. So what we're going to do is create an AA to AZ. This is going to be the range that we're going to show. This is going to be column AA to column AZ. So if you come all the way over here, you can see we've got columns A all the way through to AZ. That's going to be kind of like the columns that we're going to see on our main sheet. For all these other ones, I think we're going to have submenus for these. So I'm just going to write the word in submenu. Essentially what this is going to allow us to do is to basically trigger a secondary menu when we're creating our code. It's going to loop through all these values and create an item here for home, for bookings, for customers, vehicles, so on. And we're going to check what this show range is. If the show range says it's a submenu, then we're going to open up a secondary menu. This is going to have secondary items here. So this is what we're going to populate into this section here, the submenu section. I'm just going to quickly paste this in. So here you can see we've got on our primary menu. So this refers to our items here on our primary menu. So on our primary menu, we've got a bookings item here, and then we've got new bookings, manage bookings, booking calendar, pending approvals, booking history, export bookings, and we've got all these similar sort of items here for customers, vehicles, and a bunch of different settings. And you can see for each of these that we've set up also a show range. So these are going to be the range that we've got from a start column all the way through to the end column. We've got about, I think, 10 columns here for each different item. That just gives us a bit of room to work with when we're creating our booking system. So now we're going to set up the menu settings section. This is going to be basically where we set up our different variables that we want to be adjusting to change the way our menu looks and feels. So I'm going to just go ahead and fill in a few items here. So we've got, maybe we want to change the font size. Maybe we want to adjust how high or how tall our buttons are. Now you can use your imagination with these and kind of set these up any way you want. You're just going to need to add some considerations for those in the code. I'm going to show you how to incorporate these specific items into the code, but use your imagination. If you want to add some other items, go for it. Okay, so here we have our settings. Essentially, we're going to have a font size, button height, bold selection. This is going to mean if we click on something and the menu is going to stay open, then it will bold the text on the item that we've selected. We're going to change our menu width there to actually have 250 in the second column. This is going to be how wide our menu is going to be. We're going to have a bottom section group size. So this is going to separate an item or multiple items at the bottom of our menu. Usually want to do this with something like settings. Maybe you want to just separate off the settings, or maybe settings and users or something like that. This allows you to just keep your application items together and your administration or sort of setup items in another section. Then we have our bottom section gap. This is going to be the space between the last item in our menu and the top of the first item in our bottom section. Then we're going to have button padding. This is the spacing around each button. This submenu arrow size percent. So if we have a 100 pixels high button, this is going to set our arrow size to about 60 by 60 pixels. Our selection color, this is going to recolor the text of the selected item. And then close menu on selection, that's basically just going to make it so that if we click on something that loads a new page, then it's going to automatically close the menu. I'm just going to add an extra column in here to kind of remind myself that we're dealing with pixels. Just going to put in pixels in these ones here. We can just copy this across for the submenu settings as well. The only one we can get rid of is maybe this submenu arrow size, because obviously our submenu is not going to have any sub items. Clear the contents there and just move those up. And now that's all the setup that you're going to need in our worksheet. Now let's move over to our Visual Basic code and we can start looking at how to actually build this menu system. Now, first thing we're going to want to do when we come in here is just to right click anywhere over here in our project browser, go to insert and go to module. We're just going to call this module our menu handler. Doesn't really matter what you call it. We're not going to be calling it from external sources anyway. Option explicit, I've got this turned on to automatically appear in each of my modules and sheets and class modules. Essentially what the option explicit does is forces variable declaration. So this just reduces the possibility for errors and improves your code readability. Now in here, we're going to build a custom type. If you haven't dealt with types in VBA yet, basically what that is a type allows us to group multiple related pieces of information into a single structure, almost like a container for variables. Instead of having separate variables for things like font size, button height, or our selection color, we can bundle them all together under one name. This keeps our code clean, organized, and easy to manage. Let me show you how we use a type to define all the settings for our menu. So first thing we're going to do is create our type. This is going to be MenuSettings. Then we're going to start entering all the different values that we've put into our worksheet. So just back here, we've got our font size, button height, all these kind of things. The first thing we're going to do is add in our font size. It's going to be a font size as an integer. We want to just explicitly declare what these variables are. That way we know what is going to come in from the spreadsheet and we know how to handle. And we're going to have our button height. This is going to be an integer as well. Bold selection. So this is going to be a yes or no value. Then we're going to have a color selection. This is going to be a long. So when a color comes into VBA, it's going to have this really long number. It's going to be something that's 255 times 255 times 255. That is going to be the maximum length of what this number can be. Next is going to be our menu width. This is just going to be an integer value as well. Bottom section size, this is just going to be like 1 or 2, so that's going to be an integer. Bottom section gap is also going to be a value less than like a few thousand, so that's going to be an integer. Button padding is also going to be an integer. Submenu arrow size, this is going to be a percentage, so we're going to bring this in as a double value. And lastly, we've got close menu on select. This is going to be a Boolean value, so a yes or no value. What this is going to allow us to do is just reference a single item that's going to hold our font size, our button height, our bold selection, all these different items. So it's really easy for us to reference these different settings. In just a second, I'll create a function that shows you how to load these settings into a single item that we can start referencing somewhere else in our code. But first, all of the items that we're mentioning in our spreadsheet Things like our button height, our bottom section gap, and our button padding. These are all going to be values that we're putting in as pixel values. The way that a lot of things work in VBA is going to be referencing things in points. So we're going to want to just create a simple function that's going to convert pixels to points. So we're going to want to create a function to convert pixels to points. What it's going to look like is just a private function, pixels to points. We're going to pass in a pixels value as a long, and we're going to return that as a long value. And our pixels to points is going to be 0.75 times the pixels, and turn a value that we can start using within our VBA code. All right, now we're going to create that function to start loading these menu settings in. So we're just going to build a private function. I'm just going to call that menu_load menu settings as menu settings. So as menu settings, this is the name of our type. So that's what we're going to reference there. That's the type that we're going to be returning when we call this function. So inside here, we're going to create a new item just called settings, which is going to be of the type menu settings. And then we're going to start grabbing our values from the spreadsheet. Here we're going to just set we've got the settings item, settings.font size, because we have a font size value up here in our type. So settings.font size equals, and we want to make sure that that's an integer that we're getting. So we're going to convert it to integer and set that value J4. J4 is in here, we go column J, row 4, that's going to be our font size. The next one's going to be our button height. This is on J5, and you see we're calling this pixels to points function here. Because we're storing this value in our spreadsheet as a pixels value, we want to convert that to points that we can start using within our code. And then we're just going to add in the rest of the variables here. So we've got the bold selection, which is a boolean. We've got a menu width, which again is a points to pixels. We've got a bottom section size, just an integer. Bottom section gap, again, pixels to points. And padding, submenu size. This is again a double, so we just need to make sure that that's coming in as a double value. Our selection color, we're getting that as a long, and we're just setting that to the interior color of that cell. Because in our worksheet, you can see here that we've just set a color for that cell. So we could set this to any kind of color. We could set it to orange or blue or green or purple, and that's just going to pick up that interior color. And then we have our boolean value for if we want to close that menu on select. And then finally, we're just going to set the function variable to this settings item that we've created within the function. So now when we call menu load menu settings, what we're essentially doing is just grabbing a single variable that then houses all these different values from our spreadsheet. Now, because in our spreadsheet we also have a submenu settings section, we can just create that as a separate function. So I'm just going to copy in this code here. Essentially everything's the same. We're just missing this submenu arrow size item from the submenu settings. It doesn't matter that that item isn't referenced, because we're not going to be calling it from our code anyway. The only other thing to note here is that we're working in column N now, not in column J, and that from our submenu arrow size, which was row 11, that's now our selection color row. So we just shift things up one. You can see that is on column N. We're working in column N here for the submenu settings. One quick note here is that your type that you've built needs to be right at the top of your module, so you don't put any functions or subroutines above that. But before we start loading our menu up, we need to make sure that our menu doesn't already exist. We need to clear that menu. Essentially, what's going to happen is when we're loading our menu up, we're going to create all these shapes. Once we close our menu, or once that menu closes by itself, it's going to delete all of those shapes. So every time the menu loads, it's going to recreate those shapes. So we're just going to create a routine here for clearing the menu. So it's going to clear all menu buttons, and we're just going to call this menu clear. First thing we're going to do is create a shape object, and then we want to use this to loop through each shape in the worksheet. We're going to do for each shape in sheet1.shapes. And we're going to do if not shape. So this is saying if the shape is not the button template, because we don't want to delete that button template. We want to make sure that that button template always stays there in the background in that worksheet. And then we also make sure that our shape name has this button underscore, which is going to be part of our naming convention for our buttons as we build this code. And then simply we just want to delete that shape if it's found. Essentially, this is just going to loop through each shape, make sure that it's not a button template, make sure it's something that we need to delete, and then delete it. All right, so let's get into the fun stuff. This is where we're going to actually dynamically load our main menu. we're just going to call this routine menu load. We're just going to start creating the menu variables that we need. So first we're going to grab our menu items. These are our items that we've identified in our worksheet here. And because we're using current region, it only gets these values here. Even though this looks like it's just adjacent to this, because we have this hidden row in here, it's only grabbing these values with that current region. And then we're going to actually load in those settings. So this is simply just we're going to create a settings variable as a menu settings type and set that equal to our load menu settings function. This is going to populate our settings variable with all these variables from our workbook. Then we're going to identify what our button template is. So we're just going to create a button template shape and set that shape to the shape on our workbook. We're going to do the same thing for our background. It's going to be our menu background, and this is where we've named that menu background on our shape. Two other items that we need are going to be an iterator, so we're just going to use I, and a menu button shape. So this is going to be the button that we build as we start building out our menu. Then we're just going to clear the menu before we start building anything out. Now we need to set up and size our background shape. First thing we're going to want to do is make sure that that is visible. And then we're going to set the width. Now, what are we setting the width equal to? We have our settings.menu width. This is going to be the menu width item from our spreadsheet. And to this, we're going to add the button padding times 2. Because we're going to want to make sure that our button has space around it if we're setting something for that padding value. If that padding value is set to 0, that's obviously going to be 0 times 2, so that's going to be nothing. Next, we're going to set the height. There's a bit of calculation to the height, but I'm going to talk you through every step of that. So first thing we're going to want to do is get the upper value of the primary menu items array. This is essentially how many rows we have of the array. This is going to tell us how many items we have in our primary menu. So in this case, we have 5. And to that, we're going to multiply that by the height of our buttons plus our button padding. This is going to make sure that our menu has height enough to accommodate 5 buttons and 5 lots of padding. But what if we've set that bottom section size to something? Well, to that height, we first want to check if the bottom section size is greater than 0, so if it has a value, then we're going to want to multiply the gap by 1. So we multiply that by the bottom gap height, and we're going to minus our button padding. And then finally to that, we're going to add the button padding times 2. This is going to be the button padding for the very top of the menu height and the very bottom of the menu height. Next, we need to create and position all of our main menu buttons. To do this, we're going to loop through our entire primary menu items array. Each time we loop through, we're going to duplicate our button template and set that to our menu button shape. What this is doing is, as we're looping through these different values, we're creating a new button for home. We loop to the next one. We create a new button for bookings, to the next, to the next, and to the next. And because we're going to make sure that our template button isn't visible to the user, we're going to need to make sure that that button is visible. Then we're going to want to use a very standard sort of naming convention to name our buttons. We're going to name that menu button.name equals button underscore, and then we pass in the first value on that row, and then an underscore, and then the second value on that row. So what that's going to look like is if we come here and we go to the home button, that's going to look like button underscore home AAAZ. And then if we do bookings, that's going to be button underscore bookings underscore submenu. This naming convention is going to be very intentional so that our code can reference those names later on. Then we're going to set our button height to the settings button height that we've grabbed from our worksheet. And we're going to set the width equal to the menu width. Now, if you recall, our menu button is actually a group because we've duplicated this button template, which is also a group. Inside that group is going to be 2 items. One is called base, the other one is the open submenu item. The base is where we're going to set our text. So what we're going to do there is go to the menu button, then get the sub item, so the group item of base, and set the text of that to the first value in our primary menu items. In our first variable here, this is going to be home, and then bookings, and then customers, and so on. So that's actually going to be the name that people see on the button. And next, we've got a font size in our settings. So we're going to want to set the font size of that text. Now we set the top. This is the vertical position of that menu button. So what we're going to set that to is the top position of the background plus whatever index we're on as we're looping through this array, and we minus 1 from that because the first item is going to be right at the top of that. And then we multiply that by the height of the button and the button's padding. And then to this, we just add on the padding as well. Next, we're going to set the left value. This is going to be the horizontal position for that button, which is just going to be the left position of the background plus our padding value. Then as we're iterating through the menu items in our array, if that iteration is more than the maximum amount of items minus the bottom section size, if we have 5 items here and our bottom section size is 1, then if I is greater than 4, which means that on the 5th value of I, going to need to move those subsequent buttons further down. So we're going to set the menu button top equals the menu button top. So we've already set that up here, and then we just add the section gap to that. Now we're going to be seeing what we do with that open submenu item. Now we're going to be seeing what we do with that open submenu shape. If you recall, that open submenu shape is simply our little arrow here on each of our buttons. So we're going to be working quite a lot with that item. So we're just going to use with so that all of our subsequent references are working with this submenu item. Next, we're going to want to check if our ShowRange or our second column here has the value submenu. If it does have the submenu value there, then we need to start playing with the height and the width of that shape. We want to make sure that that height and width isn't going to squish vertically or horizontally. We just lock the aspect ratio to false. Then we set our height. So if our button height is, say, 100, then we multiply that by our submenu arrow size, which is 0.6. That's going to be 100 times 0.6 or 60%. And that's going to make that 60. And then we want the width to be exactly the same as the height. And the position of that is going to be the top of the whole menu button plus our button height minus the height of the submenu shape and divide that whole thing by 2. Then the left of that is going to be the left position of our whole menu button plus the full width of our menu button minus the width of our submenu shape. And then from all that, we want the menu button top, and we want to take that away from the top of the submenu button item and take all that away from this total. That's going to make sure that the spacing around the right side of our button is uniform the whole way around. And then we're going to make sure that our submenu shape is visible. Now, what if the value in our second column isn't submenu? Well, then we do else, and we just need to set that to hidden. Now let's see what that looks like. So if we just simply run that code and head back over to our spreadsheet, you can see there's built this menu. Although we've got our template button in there, we just want to hide that. So if we just click on that, come to our selection pane, and we just turn the visibility of that off. And there you have it. We have a simple menu that we've dynamically built based on all of these primary menu values here, plus the way we want to have it set up with our settings. Before we can handle the click event, we need to know what we're doing when we click the buttons. In the case of there actually being a range passed to the button, we need to actually show that range if that's what we're trying to achieve. So here we're going to create a routine to show only the selected range and hide the others. We're going to call that a private sub ShowRange. To that, we're going to pass the ranges value. First thing we need to do in here is just to create some variables. So we're going to get our primary menu items. These are going to be our items here in our primary menu. We're also going to need to get our submenu items. These are going to be the submenu items in this section here. And we're going to want to build out a range of all the columns that we're trying to hide. To do this, we're just going to make a join range variable. We're also going to have an iterator, which is just going to be I. So next we need to combine the ranges from our primary menu and submenu items. Now we're going to need to instantiate that join range with a given range. You can set this to whatever we like. You can set it as far off to the right as you like. I'm just going to set this to the range ZZ to ZZ. This is just one column. I'm not using this in my application, so it's not going to cause an issue. Now, as we're looping through this, we're going to have items here that are going to have this submenu value rather than an actual range. If we try and do a union on those submenu values, then it's going to throw up an error. We want it to just pass by those problems. In that case, what we need to do is to just wrap this next code in an on error resume next and an on error go to 0. 0. So this just means if it encounters an error, it just keeps going rather than causing a problem for the user. Once it finishes that and gets to here, then error handling goes back to how it normally is. So we're going to need to loop through each of our primary menu items, and then we want to set the join range to a union of whatever the join range currently is and the range of that second column value. So as we loop through these values, we've already got ZZ instantiated, so it's going to join AA to AZ and ZZ, and then this one, it's going to cause an error, so it's not going to join that with anything, and the same for these. Next, we can also join that range with all of these, so we're going to loop through those sub menu items as well, and set that join range to a union of the join range again, and the third column of data for that row. Finally, we can just hide the unrelated columns and show the selected range. So the join range is all of our unrelated columns, so we're just going to hide all of those, and then our range value up here that we're passing into the ShowRange routine, we just want to set that hidden to false. So what this is going to do is just loop through all those different ranges, hide everything that it doesn't need, and then show only the one it does. Okay, so now we can start looking at how those menu clicks are handled. So we're going to create a routine to handle those menu button clicks, and we're just going to call that menu click. Into that, we're going to pass in a button name. Now this isn't going to be the full button name, this is going to be the button name minus that little button underscore at the start of it. So what happens here is going to be different between if there's a sub menu or if we're just dealing with a standard range. So first we need to check if the button is a sub menu or a data range. If the button name has sub menu in it, then we're not sure how to handle that just yet. We're probably going to need to build a routine to handle that in just a moment. We'll just do an else statement for now. We're going to want to show the range of that value from the button name that we're passing in. Now, as you can see, this is expecting a range, and so we're passing in a range value. The range value that we're getting is going to be partially from that button name. Now, if we go back to our sheet 1 here and have a look at our home button, our home button is named like this: button underscore home underscore AA to AZ. If we're passing in a value without this button underscore, then all we're looking at is home underscore AA to AZ. All we want is this value here, this AA to AZ. So to do that, we get the middle of that button name, we find the underscore, and then we simply just add 1 to that, and that will grab everything after that underscore in the button name. But our menu items still don't have an action associated with them. So where do we put that? Well, when we're creating those menu items, down here we can add in an on-click action for each of those menu buttons that we're creating. Here we're going to do menu button.action. We'll set that equal to, we have a single quote mark here, and then we have menu click and a space, and then we need to have a double quote, which puts a double quote into the actual string of this, and then to that we add primary menu item 1. So that's going to be the name of the button itself, and then an underscore, then primary menu item 2. For a range, this is going to actually have the range here. For a submenu, that's going to have the text submenu there. And then to that, we just add another double quote and a single quote, and that creates our menu click. So now if we rerun this code, we can come to our spreadsheet, and you see my mouse is turning to a little finger now. So this is actually now recognize these as actual buttons. If we right click on here and go to assign macro, you can see this is how this macro looks. We've got an apostrophe or a single quote, then menu click, a space, and in double quotes we've got home underscore AAAZ, and then just another single quote there. So that essentially passes the value of home underscore AAAZ into this menu click string here. So because we've already handled what happens if there isn't a sub menu, we can actually just try this out. So I'm just going to move this over to the left here, expand this out, and then I'm just going to rerun that code to load my menu in the new location. Now because all of our items here are from AA onwards, we're not going to see anything happen if this is all we're seeing. So if I just hide these, there's going to be C to Z. You can see we've got columns A all the way moving forwards. Notably, you see that BA onwards is there. Now if we click that home button, this still looks the same. So AA all the way to AZ, but you now see that after AZ, we've just got KG there because the last column that we've referenced in our show ranges is KF, next column is KG. So now we want to see what happens with those sub-menu items. So the same thing as what we did for this menu load, we're going to do a menu clear or a sub-menu clear. So this is going to be generally the same as the menu clear routine. So we're just going to go through this quickly. We're going to clear all the sub-menu buttons. That's going to be a sub-menu underscore clear routine. So we're going to create a shape object. We're going to loop through each of the shapes in the sheet 1. We're going to check for the naming convention submenu button underscore, and then we're going to delete that shape. So next we're just going to build our routine for loading our submenu. So we're going to dynamically load those submenu items, and we're going to create a subroutine for submenu load, and we're going to pass him the item name. The item name is going to be the name of the main menu option, which is going to check this value and then return all the values here for the menu options of the submenu. A lot of this is going to be quite similar to our menu load routine. So I'm just going to focus on the areas where we have differences between submenu and main menu. Obviously, we're going to have a different section region that we're referring to grab these values for the submenu items. We're going to be loading the settings from the load submenu settings because we made both of these. Remember, we had the menu load menu settings and the menu load submenu settings. And then we're going to use the same button template as we used for the main menu. If you want, you can create separate button templates for the submenu and primary menu, but I'm just going to use the same template button for both. We're going to have button template. We're going to have our menu background, which is going to be for this one our submenu background. And then we're going to have our iterator and our menu button shape. Now, layout's going to change depending on the number of submenu items that we have. So we're going to count those submenu items for our layout adjustment. We're going to create a value that we can count and build while we're looping through those items. So we're going to iterate through each of the items in the submenu items array, and we're going to see if that first list item is item name, which is the value that we've passed in to this routine. And then we're just going to build up a count of those. Next thing we're going to do is just clear the original submenu that we had, and then we're going to set the size of the submenu background. This is going to be the same as our primary menu. So we're just going to set it to visible. We're going to set the width and the height of those values. Now here's the part where we actually get to generate those buttons for our submenu. First thing we'll need is a menu index. This is going to be our vertical position within the submenu. Then we do a for loop to loop through each of the items in our submenu and check if the submenu item is the item name. Then we set our menu button to the duplicate of the template, set that equal to true. Then we use this naming convention for the submenu button. We set our button height to the settings button height and the width and the base subshape. We set the value of the text and the font size of the text. And we set the top, except this time we're multiplying it by the menu index rather than the I value. If we use the I value, our customers list would have this big gap at the top because we're looping through each of these as well. Our vehicles would have all of these at the top because we need to loop through all of these first to start creating these shapes. So we simply use a menu index and iterate through that, and we'll increment that at the end of every loop, providing that our item name is correct. Then we set the left position, we loop through and make sure that that bottom section is set up properly. We set that open submenu to hidden because we don't want any submenus within our submenus. And then we set our on action for this. So again, we just have our menu click. To this, we're passing through the menu option and the range, and then we just need to increment that index number. Now we can add this submenu load into our click routine. In here we're just going to put our submenu load, and we need to pass through a value. So we need to, same as we did down here, we're going to pass through our item name as a string, and that's going to be a mid of the button name. Button name has been passed to the routine here. We're going to start at the first letter because the first letter is going to be the combination of this and this. So we want this menu item. And then we just find the position of that underscore and take one away from it. That'll return just what we need. So now if we run the code to load our menu again, and go to sheet 1, now we should be able to click on these and a submenu is created for each of those. Now you'll notice that our submenu isn't loading in the correct position. It's just loading in the same position every time. So why is this? Well, let's have a look at our submenu load. You can see here that we're not actually setting the left and the top position of our menu in any way, shape or form. So to do that, we're going to need to just loop through each of the shapes in the sheet. So we're just going to create a shape here, loop through each shape. Then we want to find the button with the item name that we're being passed and the submenu text at the end. We want to set the left position of our menu background to the shape's left and the shape's width. This shape is going to be the button that we're actually pressing to load the submenu. And we're going to set the top position to the top of that shape. Once we found that, we don't need to loop through that anymore. So we can just exit that for loop. Now, whenever we click on one of these items with a submenu, it'll load up next to that item. Now I'm looking at these background menu items. I'm thinking they might use some sort of a border might be nice. So we'll just add a border to those. Now we can easily see the segregation between the primary menu and the submenu. Then we set up this color here for the selection color, but that's not happening yet, so we'll need to do that. This is going to highlight the selected text and update the display. We're just going to call this color selection, and we're going to pass in the button name, same way as we do for the button click. Then we're going to get the button template for the default formatting. To do that, we're just going to set a shape button template, then we're going to create a shape object, which again we're going to use to just loop through each of the items in our worksheet. So first we're going to check how to color the primary button names. If you recall, our button naming structure for those was just underscore button. So we're going to just compare the name of the shape that we're looping through to see if we're on a primary menu button. And then we want to set the fill color of the sub menu arrow using fill for color RBG, and we're going to just set that to a default value. Default value that we're going to use is from the button template, and we're just going to set it to the same thing as with the current shape. This essentially just allows us to reset all the button shapes to what we need. Then we just do the same thing with the text color. Then we're going to check if it's found our button that we're referring to. Then we're going to highlight the selected button. To do that, we just have to check if we've found the right button, and we're going to get our settings. We'll just create a variable for settings, and then we want to check if we're dealing with a sub menu button or a primary menu button, because in here we have two different possibilities for our colors. We just check if we have a submenu button, else we don't have a submenu button, and then we just set the settings to either the submenu settings or the primary menu settings. Then we just need to set the group items for the open submenu shape arrow to our selection color from our settings, and the base text color to that same color. We want to just check if we're dealing with a submenu or not. So if we're not, then we can update the display and close the menu if we need to. We do if in string shape name underscore submenu. This is always going to be at the end of our string if it's a primary menu. If that equals 0, then I think we want to use some sort of a heading. We're going to set a heading. We're going to place that in C2, and we're going to set that to the text of the selected menu item. And then we're going to check if we need to close the menu on select. This is one of our variables in our settings. And then we need to close the menu. We don't have anything to do that just yet, but let's just create that now. So we've got menu close is what we're going to build, and then we can just exit the routine after that. Now finally, our last two routines that we need are our menu open and menu close. These are going to be some nice simple routines to open and close our menu, which are going to be triggered from those burger buttons and the close from in here in the color selection. First, we'll build a menu open routine. We're going to reference the burger group that we built. This was right back at the start, but this is just referring to these two items here. It's going to be called the burger menu, and that's the group name. So we're going to set a burger group shape equals to that burger menu group. If we're opening it, we're sure that the group item that we're pressing is the open item. So we can set that to hidden. We're setting the visible state to false. And then we're going to load the menu. This is calling our load menu routine down here. And then we're going to show the close button. And that's all we need for that. And now we're going to build out the same sort of thing for our close menu. We're going to do a public sub close menu. We're going to get that burger group again. We're going to set the state of the open to visible. And we're going to make sure that we're clearing the menu and the sub menu and hiding the close button of the burger group. And we also want to just make sure that the menu background and the sub menu background are also hidden. And that's all we need to do. So now we just come in here. We just need to assign those open and close macros to these two icons. We've got assign. This is the open menu. This one is the close menu. And now if we press the close, that will close the menu as it is. Press open, that opens it. So then you can see we're moving the close and open buttons. Just hide all the way to C. Actually, we want to set that to C1, the heading. Let me C1 here. What we can do for the heading, want to make sure that that's black. We'll put that as a nice big bold font. Go Aptos black, make it nice and chunky. And then because we don't necessarily want it always in this C column, we can just sort of nudge that over so it looks like it's the heading of the section that we're showing without actually having to put it into the heading of that section. I'll hide all the irrelevant columns. Now if we press home, you'll see that that actually hasn't changed the heading. The reason for that is we haven't actually called this color selection from our menu click. So all we have to do here is call color selection and pass in that button name. And now we should have a fully functional menu system. See, it's doing the coloring nicely. We're setting that heading, and every time you see the column that are visible are changing. Now obviously you can color and adjust this any way you like. And we could change the heading color to gray. We could set the color of these buttons to white, and we'll put that text to white as well. That gives us a bit of a different look and feel. Maybe you also want to fully cover up that side menu there. And we open up the burger menu, and you have each of your items. And that's it. That's how to create a dynamic menu system that you can adjust to your own needs. You can set this up as a framework and you can apply this to multiple spreadsheets, easily adjusting the different menu items, the different setups, styles, whatever you need to set up depending on the application. If you're still here, I would really appreciate if you could hit that like and subscribe and turn on the notification bell to get alerts when I post new content. Comment down below and let me know how you would apply this to your own applications, or if you've learned anything new in this tutorial. Thanks very much for sticking around. This is your VB Tutor signing out.